Against the Gods was the title of a very best-selling book by Peter Bernstein, and the full title was Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk. Peter wrote the definitive book of the origins of our modern understanding of risk and uncertainty. And it was a wonderful book full of history, taking mathematics and the study of probability all the way back to, in particular, to the 16th century and the 17th century, when a lot of the kind of core mathematics was laid down. And then explaining brilliantly how these concepts played through to where we are today, and how risk can be used as a way of understanding all kinds of decisions that we make in many different aspects of our lives. So whether you're a corporation making business decisions, but also an individual facing the kind of many of the typical decisions that we face in our lives about buying houses or making investments and so on. If you think about the title Against the Gods, Peter's belief was that the great insight about risk when it happened in the 16th century was that man was not at the mercy of some sort of God up there in the sky, that we could use mathematics and an understanding of probabilities and uncertainty to realise that we were actually much more in control of our own destiny than that sort of pre-enlightened society had believed. Now, it took a long time for those ideas fully to filter through, but it's almost like a kind of religious insight about our relationship to the life in Earth around us. And then I think what Peter did in the book and in the rest of his thinking was develop that idea brilliantly into, okay, if it is all about decisions that we can take within parameters that we can understand up to a point, because there is uncertainty and that is beyond our control, how do we think about that? How do we communicate about that in ways that actually are meaningful for people who may not think of themselves as risk experts, but are actually taking decisions all the time? You could argue that some of the sophistication we have today is becoming a problem rather than a search for a solution, because there's so much complexity now in the way that we approach risk. And actually, again, I think one of Peter's great contributions was to really believe in simple concepts as a way of trying to get people to understand that they were involved actually in quite complex and sophisticated decision processes. So I'll give you what I think of as an excellent example. So he was very interested in the idea that some decisions are quite easy to reverse. And so in that sense, they're not particularly risky, because if you can change your mind and it's not too costly to get out of something that you've done, you don't worry about it too much. So you don't put too much of a price on that decision. But if a decision is really difficult to reverse, so you start something and you're committed to it because you have to either finish it or pulling out is going to be extremely expensive, then that decision is worth a lot to you. And you might find that you actually want to wait before you take that decision, perhaps to get some new information or whatever. And again, Peter had this genius for saying, well, if you think about it, that's a description of an option. An option is just the decision to wait while you figure out whether or not you're actually going to take the decision. And the formal mechanism of the financial option just puts a price on that waiting. Now, that sounds incredibly simple, and actually it's very insightful and quite deep. And I think that was one of the things that Peter was exceptional at bringing to our understanding of risk.